President Trump has approved plans for America to join Israel's attacks on Iran, but is said to still be making a final decision on whether to go ahead with that. Well, the BBC's US partner CBS News says it's been told by two sources that the US president is waiting to see if Tehran agrees to abandon its nuclear program. Well, I've been speaking to CBS News correspondent Jared Hill to get the latest developments from the US.
So there are a couple of things that we are learning from sources here at CBS News about President Trump's potential decision on what to do with Iran. One of the factors from what we've learned from sources is that it is dependent upon whether Iran in some way, shape or form decides to abandon its nuclear program. Yesterday, President Trump said that Iranian officials had been asking to come to the White House to talk about this. Iranians, though, have said that they have not had any type of conversation about that. And so we still don't know what the truth is there. The Iranians are also saying that they don't plan on surrendering. The other factor here that we've learned is that President Trump is potentially waiting for more U.S. military assets to arrive in the region before he makes a decision on whether there will be some type of physical strike on Iran. We have seen some efforts from some Republican and Democratic lawmakers here in the U.S. on Capitol Hill in Washington, weighing whether they should push through a bill or a law that would prevent President Trump from acting on Iran without the approval of Congress. That is in the early stages right now, but all of this showcases just how divisive this issue is here in the States.
Indeed, and perhaps even divisive in his government, Jared, because we heard a couple of months ago from Tulsi Gabbard, who said something quite different in terms of how ready Iran was in terms of nuclear capabilities.
That's right. So the argument here is that all of this is happening because Iran, the argument again is Iran is incredibly close to enriching enough uranium to have a nuclear weapon. What we heard from Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, just in March, was that the assessment was that Iran was not close to having a nuclear weapon. President Trump, a couple of days ago, said he doesn't care what Tulsi Gabbard said. He believes, based on his current knowledge or intuition, that they are close to having a nuclear weapon. And so there is that division within the Trump administration itself on the intel.
Well, that's Jared Hill with the view from the United States as President Trump decides whether or not to join Israel in its military action. And we are getting some response on Iranian state media from Iran's deputy foreign minister, who said if the US wants to actively intervene in support of Israel, Iran will have no other option but to use its tools to teach aggressors a lesson and defend itself. Well, as efforts to de-escalate the tensions continue, the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy is going to be meeting his US counterpart Marco Rubio in Washington today. Well, earlier I was speaking to our political correspondent Joe Pike in Westminster to get more of a sense of the UK's position on all of this.
The UK's position is evolving because the key message of escalation we've heard from UK government ministers does not seem to be being heeded in the White House. David Lammy meeting Marco Rubio today and other key contacts in Washington, D.C., we're told. There has been some tension in the relations between the two countries over the UK's decision with some other nations like Australia and Canada to sanction two Israeli ministers in connection to their comments on Gaza. Now, the UK's position has sort of two key question marks around it. Firstly, over what the US ask to the UK might be if there is intervention. How could the UK be involved? A lot of speculation around the UK military base at Diego Garcia. That's in the Chagos Islands in the centre of the Indian Ocean, because that's where it's certainly possible that American B-2 stealth bombers could launch from if they are to take action in Iran. Another possibility, of course, is the UK does what it did last October, which is shoot down missiles being fired from Iran towards Israel. The second big question mark for the UK government really is around the legal advice, and certainly echoes of the legal advice and the sort of debates over legal advice around the Iraq war 22 years ago. Suddenly the Attorney General, who's not a particularly prominent figure in UK politics, comes to the fore again in these sorts lots of discussions. Richard Herman's the Attorney General, and his legal advice around different sort of roles for the UK government will be fascinating. Number 10 saying to me today he's closely involved, but they do not want to comment on what that legal advice might be. One other key point I think it's definitely worth making, Regina, and that is around how people are feeling in the UK government, in particular in the Foreign Office. Diplomats do seem definitely anxious, not just anxious about avoiding an escalation in the Middle East, but also maintaining what so far seems to have been a pretty positive relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Starmer. There are UK diplomats and government sources within Number 10 who believe they've really aced the first 6 months of the Trump presidency. They point to this UK-US trade agreement, which is limited. It's not all enacted, but it has, they argue, tangibly improved the access to the US markets of some UK companies. And the UK got to the head of the queue with that. And therefore, there is this anxiety that that relationship between Starmer and Trump, between Number 10 and the White House, between the UK and the US is maintained, whatever Donald Trump decides to do in the coming hours and days.
Well, that's Joe Pike in Westminster there. A short while ago, we brought you reports that foreign ministers from the UK, Germany, France and the EU were planning to meet in Geneva on Friday to have talks to de-escalate the situation. They were planning to meet Iran. Well, that's now been confirmed according to Iranian state media. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirming that there will be a meeting between him and European counterparts in Geneva. So, of course, efforts to de-escalate the situation continuing. And that is, of course, significant because it's European leaders meeting with Iran.